If Taiwan disappeared tomorrow, your phone would stop working within a year. So would your car, your bank, your hospital's MRI machine, even the missile defense systems protecting the countries that could go to war over this exact island. That's not an exaggeration. It's math. One company on one island, roughly the size of Maryland, produces over 90% of the world's most advanced computer chips. Not most, 90%. And here's what nobody tells you. The company isn't even the most fascinating part of this story. The real story is how a poor, isolated island with no natural resources and a hostile neighbor next door quietly became the single point of failure for the entire global economy. By the end of this, you'll understand why the US military, Chinese leadership, and every tech CEO on Earth is obsessed with a single industrial park in a city most Americans couldn't find on a map. Let's start at the beginning. Because Taiwan wasn't supposed to win this. In 1949, Taiwan was a disaster. The Chinese Civil War had just ended. The losing side, the nationalists, fled to this small island with nothing but gold reserves and 2 million refugees. No oil, no coal, no industrial base. Most economists at the time gave it no real future. But here's what nobody tells you. Taiwan's poverty became its strategy. With no natural resources to export, Taiwan's government made a bet in the 1970s that sounded insane at the time. Instead of farming or manufacturing textiles forever, they'd build an entire economy around something almost nobody understood yet. Semiconductors. The man who made this happen was a government official named K.T. Lee. He sent engineers to the United States to learn chip design. He built science parks with government money. He offered tax breaks that seemed reckless for a country this poor. Then, in 1987, one man changed everything. His name was Morris Chang. He'd spent 25 years at Texas Instruments in America, rising near the top, only to get passed over for CEO. Frustrated, he came to Taiwan and did something no one else had tried. He created a company that would only manufacture chips designed by other companies. Not compete with them. Just build what they needed at massive scale better than anyone else could. That company was TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. At the time, this business model seemed almost too simple to matter. Yet the real story was completely different from what anyone expected. Because what Morris Chang had actually invented wasn't just a company. It was a chokehold. Here's the part that sounds boring until you realize what it means. Making a modern computer chip is, without exaggeration, one of the hardest manufacturing processes human beings have ever attempted. We're talking about carving transistors onto silicon at a scale smaller than a virus. Some of today's most advanced chips pack over 100 billion transistors onto a piece of material smaller than your fingernail. To do this, you need machines so precise they cost over $150 million each, built by a single company in the Netherlands, using mirrors so smooth that if you scaled one up to the size of Germany, the tallest bump on its surface would be less than a millimeter high. Only a handful of factories on Earth can even attempt this. And TSMC operates the most advanced ones. But here's what nobody tells you. It's not just about the machines. It's about something almost impossible to copy. Institutional knowledge. Decades of failed experiments. Thousands of engineers who've spent their entire careers solving problems that have never existed before, because no one has ever tried to build something this small, this fast before them. You can buy the machines. You can hire the engineers. But you cannot buy 35 years of accumulated trial and error. This is why, as of the early 2020s, TSMC alone produced over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the tiny chips inside the iPhone in your pocket, the AI systems powering ChatGPT, the guidance systems in fighter jets, the satellites orbiting above your head right now. Apple, NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm, all of them dependent on this one supply chain. And that dependence created something far more dangerous than a business risk. Created a geopolitical trigger. Taiwan's government has a name for this strategy. They call it the Silicon Shield. The idea is simple and honestly kind of brilliant. If Taiwan's chip industry is so essential to the global economy that a Chinese invasion would collapse supply chains worldwide, then maybe, just maybe, the rest of the world will feel forced to defend it. But here's what nobody tells you. This shield cuts both ways. China sits 90 miles away, across a stretch of water called the Taiwan Strait. Chinese leadership has never renounced the possibility of reunifying with Taiwan by force. And every year, tensions escalate a little more. Now picture what happens if conflict actually breaks out. Experts have estimated that a full-scale disruption to Taiwan's chip production could trigger economic damage in the trillions of dollars globally, Not because of the war itself, but because modern civilization simply cannot function without the chips this island produces. Car factories would halt within weeks. Data centers running artificial intelligence would stall. Military equipment production, ironically including the weapons systems needed to respond to the crisis, would grind down. This is why the United States has spent years trying to reduce this dependency. In 2022, Washington passed the CHIPS Act, funneling tens of billions of dollars toward building semiconductor factories on American soil. TSMC itself began constructing plants in Arizona. Yet the real story was completely different from what politicians promised the public. Because building a chip factory isn't like building a car plant. It takes years, sometimes a decade, and requires an ecosystem of specialized suppliers, engineers, and institutional knowledge that America simply doesn't have yet. Even TSMC's own chairman admitted publicly that the most advanced production would likely stay in Taiwan for years to come, no matter how much money other countries throw at the problem. Which means the world isn't as protected as it thinks. And that leads to the most unsettling question in this entire story. Let's play this out. Not as fear-mongering but as fact. If conflict ever disrupted Taiwan's chip production, even temporarily, the consequences wouldn't stay contained to phones and laptops. Modern hospitals rely on chip-powered diagnostic equipment. Power grids use semiconductors to manage electricity distribution. Financial systems, banking networks, air traffic control. Nearly every piece of critical infrastructure in the developed world runs on components that trace back to this one island. But here's what nobody tells you. This isn't some far-off hypothetical anymore. In recent years, Chinese military aircraft have conducted increasingly frequent incursions near Taiwanese airspace. The U.S. has conducted its own military exercises in response. Analysts across the political spectrum, from the Pentagon to independent think tanks, now openly discuss Taiwan as one of the most likely flashpoints for a major global conflict this decade. What happened next changed everything about how governments think about supply chains. Japan began building its own domestic chip capacity. South Korea, home to Samsung, doubled down on its own production. The European Union announced its own multi-billion-dollar semiconductor strategy. Everyone suddenly was racing to reduce how much they depended on a single island caught between two superpowers. But experts largely agree on one uncomfortable truth. Even with all this investment, meaningfully reducing dependence on Taiwan's most advanced chips will likely take until the 2030s, if it happens at all. Which means for at least the next several years, the entire global technology economy remains balanced on the stability of one narrow strait of water, and the decisions made by leaders in Beijing, Taipei, and Washington. Not oil, not gold, not even data. Silicon carved with impossible precision, on an island the world can't afford to lose. So here's the question worth sitting with. For decades, global power was measured in oil reserves, military bases, nuclear stockpiles. But Taiwan proved something different. A small island with no natural resources built the single most important choke point in the modern world, not through conquest, but through decades of engineering obsession that no one else was patient enough to match. That's the real story here. Not just geopolitics, not just business. It's proof that in the 21st century, the most powerful nations on Earth aren't always the biggest. Sometimes they're just the ones who figured out how to become impossible to replace. If this documentary changed how you see the technology in your pocket right now, subscribe to Atlas Brief. Because the next story we're covering might be even harder to believe.